If you spend any time on the spiritual path, or if you try to take a sincere spiritual intention and apply it to human life, you're very quickly confronted with something, which is that God, grace, the power of the universe, can be a trickster. And this is true no matter what our orientation is culturally or religiously. One of the things that I love about the Indian mystical tradition and some of the things that come from Hinduism is that they allow for this trickster energy and even celebrate it. The celebration of Holi Purnima, the full moon in the Western Hemisphere, the springtime, in the Northern Hemisphere, I should say, is a celebration of, in part, the trickster energy of God. Holi commemorates the victory of one of the avatars of Vishnu called Narasimhadev over the demon Hiranyakashipu. It's also a celebration, and perhaps this is something that has, grown over the years, a celebration of the love between Radha and Krishna. Krishna, of course, being one of the most famous of the Hindu avatars, blue-colored cowherder, eternal lover. He's also the guru of the Bhagavad Gita. Let's tell the story of Hiranyakashipu, and then we'll take it from there. So, and this is a very cliff-noted story. The story is much deeper and many more layers than this. So there was a demon king, and he was called Hiranyakashipu. And he was quite wicked. But the king had a son named Prahlad. Prahlad was a sadhaka. Prahlad was a devotee of Vishnu. He was a Vaishnava. And, typically in the tradition, the Vaishnavas are more thought of as the bhakti yogis. I mean, bhakti yoga can happen in any form, not just in Hinduism. There's, bhakti yoga that takes the form of Sufism and, devotional practice within all persuasions of sacred thought, really. But in India, oftentimes the bhakti yogis are Vaishnavas, and Prahlad was this great lover of Vishnu, even though he himself, was of a demon heritage, and his father was this great demon king, Hiranyakashipu. So the story goes that Prahlad was talking about his love for Vishnu, and his father was harassing him and was teasing him, challenging him, being sarcastic and saying, "Oh, what about your God? How great could your God possibly be? And where is your God now?" And was like really getting more and more hostile and abusive to his son. And he said, "Well, the Lord is everywhere, Father. It's in all things. There's nothing, even in you, where the the Lord is not. And so then Hiranyakashipu started going on this tirade, as tyrants tend to do. And he started smashing things with his stick. You know, he had like a scepter, or, you know, some sort of fancy king stick. And he started smashing all these things, saying, "Whoa, what about in this?" and smashing it. "What about in that?" and smashing it. And the story goes is that he smashed his stick into a pillar, and from the pillar emerged Narasimhadev. Narasimhadeva is the avatar, the incarnation of Vishnu that maybe you've seen pictures of, that has a lion head. Narasimha, Nara means human and Sima means lion. So Narasimhadeva is this form, this like really wrathful form of Vishnu, came out of the pillar and proceeded to disembowel the Hiranyakashipu and wrap his intestines around his own neck like a garland. Pretty brutal stuff. So you'll see these pictures, and you know, now that you know the story, you know, you can Google them or whatever. But you know, usually there's this picture of Narasimhadev looking very fierce, and there's a, you know, Hiranyakashipu is laying across his lap, usually bloody, and you don't necessarily see it immediately. But now that you know the story, you can see the intestines around his neck, and then Prahlad is like standing there, you know, piously observing. The story goes on. Those stories are from the sort of Hindu stories. In the text called the Yoga Vasishta, which is it's a sadhana scripture. It's a scripture about liberation. The story goes on and explains Prahlad's enlightenment that happens, you know, right after that, like in the wake of this, you know, very intense situation. Prahlad goes into this inner inquiry, and within that inner inquiry about his own nature, he attains enlightenment. So Holi, from the Hindus' point of view, originally it's a celebration of that. And there's so much in that. There's so much in this story. I mean, including violence, you know. But if we understand that what we're talking about here is iconography, and, you know, we're talking about, you know, myth and archetypes, it's okay, I think. Holi is also the celebration of the love between Radha and Krishna. And this is getting us more honed into our topic for the day. So Krishna, again, like Narasimhadev, was one of the avatars of Vishnu, like Vishnu in an earthly form, according to the stories. And there was a wicked king who was aware of Krishna's incarnation and who was going to try to kill him out of jealousy. And so Krishna's birth parents hid him with some cowherders, some sort of simple village folk in the land known as Vrindavan. So Krishna grew up, although he was an incarnation of God, he grew up as a cowherder. And so many of the names that we know of Krishna and that we chant, especially like Govinda and Gopala, these are all names, you know, these mean like cowboy, basically. Not like our macho cowboy, but like an Indian cowboy, you know, the boys that spend time, take care of the cows and you know, look after them in the field, in the pastures. So there are all these stories about Krishna growing up as a human amidst humans, and them interacting with him in this spectrum of human to divine. And one of his core characteristics, besides his apparently unrivaled beauty and ultimate attractiveness, was his mischievousness. Now, I'm not going to spend this whole time talking about these old stories. I'm going to talk about how this relates to our path of Bhakti Yoga. But bear with me here. So there are all these stories about Krishna, when he was very small, he was the butter thief. And so you'll see these pictures of him, and we might not even understand what it is coming from the West, but he's got this pot, like an earthen pot, and he's like this fat little blue baby with a peacock feather on his head, and he's got his hand in it. It's supposed to be butter. And butter is a very precious commodity, a very precious item. And so he would always steal the butter. There's all these stories and other holidays that relate to Krishna where there's still a tradition of butter pots and yogurt pots and all these sorts of things. But when he was a teenager or a young man, a lot of his mischievousness took on more of an erotic nature. And, so he was Gopala, Govinda. And so also in this place were the gopis. The gopis were the girls, the young unmarried women, young women really, who were also looking after the cows in this community, and they were all in love with Krishna. And, he was beautiful, and he played a flute, and he would stand there looking after his cows, playing the flute, and all of the gopis were in love with him. Now, this is all allegorical, remember. And he then would love them. He was lovers to them. He would also tease them and harass them. Famously, would steal their clothes while they were bathing naked in the Yamuna River. And all these stories. There's one story where he manifested himself into as many forms as there were gopis and made love to all of them. Until then, they started having doubts, and they started thinking, well, wait a minute, I'm here with Krishna, but she's over there with Krishna. How could this be? And as soon as that doubt came, poof, Krishna would disappear, and that gopi would be embracing a tree. And this other one would think, oh, this is amazing. Is this going to last forever? I hope it does. And when that thought would come, poof, Krishna would disappear, and that gopi would be embracing a rock or something, And of all of the gopis, it is said that the one that could really handle Krishna, the one that could match Krishna, was Radha. So Radha and Krishna are these archetypal symbols of unstoppable love. And, they loved each other so much that they would take on each other's attributes. And well, Radha was married to another man, and she was older. There were so many things that were actually illegitimate according to societal ideas about that whole thing. So there again, there's so many stories. Oftentimes the gods and goddesses in the stories were mischievous. The saints too, but we'll come to the saints in a moment. So in the West, we're drilled in this other idea of limited perfection and dualistic goodness. That is what God is. That God is the champion of the righteous. That God is synonymous with good. And by extrapolation, God is really into obedience and allegiance. And God the Father, as it's thought of in the West, really wants us to be good little boys and good little girls. Obedient to his, as he's always a he, to his command. And that he will be faithful back to us. But what we actually find on the path is that it's rarely a straight line. It's rarely a linear path. In the Aglala Lakota tradition, they have an idea called the red road and the black road. That the red road is kind of the road of consciousness, and the black road is the road of unconsciousness. And the red road is the road of honor, and the black road is the road of dishonor. And the black road is described as being very wide and very popular and very easy to be on. And the red road is very narrow and windy and requires us to really pay attention while we're there. I like this red road and black road idea because in my experience, and this is the heart of what we're talking about today, it's this real spiritual path. I'm not talking about like a religious path. I'm not talking about like a path of obedience and allegiance. I'm talking about like the actual path of sadhana, of awakening, of liberation, is a path that is rarely straight. And that requires us, instead of just believing something, the Bible said it, I believe it, that settles it. No, instead of that, it's like, here is the path and here's life, and go. here's the teachings, here's the practices. And then the basic idea from the yoga point of view, from the tantra point of view, which is the tradition that I mostly teach from, the non-dual tantric darshana or perspective, is that within the human body, within our human experience, in other words, once we're born, once our soul becomes human, within this we have both Guda Vidya and also Jagannamaya. So we have both Guda Vidya, which means hidden wisdom, and we also have Jagannamaya. We have like massive illusion, massive delusion. That within us we have, as the Shiva Sutra say, Chaitanya Atma, we have like this beautiful, conscious, divine, essential nature. And we also have Jnanam Bandhaha. We have like this bondage in the way that we think and the way that we understand and the basic experience that we live in, really. We have both of these things. And so on the path of liberation, we sort of wake up. Hopefully there's an initiation process, and like our Kundalini becomes awakened. We talked about this. We oftentimes talk about this. And then we go through this process of evolving out of our bondage and into our liberation. I mean, the liberation is already there, but we're, to the extent that we're living in our bondage, we have to evolve into the liberation. You know? Within that, on that path, it's not just a matter of following some commandments or doing some practices. We have some of these ideas and some of these ideals about unconditional love, maybe, about service, perhaps. Maybe there's some ideas of virtue, like humility or, like an attitude of reverence, respect for others, compassion, being rooted in wisdom in a steady way. But then we're in life and we're in this mix with all kinds of other people and all kinds of other circumstances. Tantra explains all of this. It's just like part of the way that it goes. And so then what worked yesterday isn't going to work tomorrow. Then it's not a matter of being obedient. It's a matter of being awake. And to me, this is what the trickster archetype, a lot of what the trickster archetype has to offer us is wakefulness. They say, I believe it was Margaret Mead probably, that in traditional Balinese society, the parents, especially the fathers, would oftentimes wear these really scary masks and frighten their children. And, I definitely maybe don't do exactly that all the time, although sometimes I do exactly that. I think that there's something important to the idea of, with my kids, playing with them in a way where there is a trickster energy, where, there is like a fooling them, not to make them feel stupid, not just for the sake of frightening them, but for the sake of helping them learn how to, discern a little bit. They are really, and they're into it. They're into it. Yesterday was here in the U.S. anyway, St. Patrick's Day. And it happens this year to fall on the eve of Holi. And their school has turned St. Patrick's Day into a trickster holiday where the leprechaun comes and, plays tricks and leaves treats and that sort of thing. Almost like a trickster Santa Claus, which I really like. And so we didn't really do that so much, but in the spirit of that this morning, when I brought them out for their breakfast, they came and I accidentally burnt their toast pretty badly. But I took their burnt toast and put it on the plate and gave each of them a red potato, the whole potato raw next to it, and said that this is the breakfast that we eat here the day after St. Patrick's Day, just for fun, just to see how they'd react. If Grace's role is to help us evolve, then Grace's role is to help us grow. And in my experience, Grace is not afraid of my pain, has, you could say, if you're going to anthropomorphize Grace into like a God being, that God loves me so much and also believes in my strength way more than I believe in my strength, and is not afraid to give me challenges that are well beyond what I believe I have the strength to face. This is where I think that this mischievous face of God teaching is very important, is that on the path, especially when we're looking at the non-dualist point of view, we need to be able to see everything as part of the path. Everything. So that means, yes, the things that feel very holy and very, earnest and peaceful and compassionate, but also the things that feel like, wild chaos. We need to be able to have some sense of, okay, I'm tuning into God's will. I'm tuning into the will of that. I'm saying the word God, the higher power, the source energy. I'm tuning into that, and I'm tuning into that will, and then from that, then I have these desires and these goals, and then I offer those goals, and then in my outside life, I'm in pursuit of these things, and God will make them happen, and then I'm grateful, and like this sort of thing. Traditional societies, we plant the crops, we say a prayer, we harvest the crops, we offer some of the bounty, in a ceremony to give thanks, and we have a big feast, and we give thanks, and then the next year we plant again and we pray, and it's important to have that, and also to understand that for us as human beings, oftentimes what we want is not really what we want. What we think we want is not really what we need. Just in general. But then once we get into this game of being a seeker, especially being a sadhaka is one who is not just a spiritual seeker, but it's a spiritual seeker on the road to being a master themselves. This is not just someone who enjoys the wizardry, but this is someone who's training to be a wizard themselves. Okay? When we are actual seekers, sadhakas in this sense, then it's especially important to have room for the trickster archetype within our idea of the divine, because in my experience, grace is going to stir things up. Grace is going to turn things topsy-turvy for the sake of waking us up. For the sake of keeping us from just becoming religious. I believe that the last thing grace wants is for us to become religious. Because to be religious, we have to close ourselves. To be religious, then in most religions, it means we need to turn against others. And most importantly, from our perspective as yogis, to become religious means we stop questioning, we stop thinking, and we just start following. The siddhas, the saints, the realized beings, oftentimes embody this trickster energy. Like, again, not in the Western idea of a saint. In the Western idea of the saint, It's someone who does not sin. It's someone who is like so obedient. Like even if in American English anyway, when we use the term saint, it means somebody who's perfect. Even in the Indian vernacular, the Sanskrit word siddha, which is a term that could refer to an enlightened being, siddha sometimes is translated as a perfected one. Siddha can mean perfect. It can also mean empowered. I prefer to use the word siddha, meaning one who is empowered, one who is embraced and has cultivated their powers, so to speak. The word siddhi is the root of that, meaning a power or an attainment. So a siddha is one with an attainment. The saint in the Western sense is someone who makes no mistakes. But in the East, there are so many stories of these wild saints. Saints who didn't conform to anything, and oftentimes the saints were the ones who were persecuted by the religious authorities of the time, like Mansur Mastana. Do you know him? He's also called I don't remember right now. I'm having a little bit of a mini moment. It'll come to me. But Mansur Mastana was a Sufi master and poet, and we still sing his songs today. And he had this realization in the Arabic language, anahlak, which means I am that. I am haq. The God. I am Allah, basically. That is what I actually am. But in the religious authority, that is considered heresy, the worst kind of heresy. And although he was this great saint and uplifted so many people and was this incredibly benevolent character, the religious authorities of the day took him and arrested him and executed him publicly, impaled him, it is said, and chopped his body into pieces and threw it in the river inauspiciously. The story goes, in the hagiography of Mansur Mastana, Al-Halaj, he was called, Al-Halaj. He never stopped declaring Al-Halak. And he just kept affirming it and to the point where he, they killed his body, and then it said that the whole atmosphere around him just resonated with that mantra, Analak, Analak, Analak. And even when they were throwing the pieces of his body in the river, still then that vibration was there. Joan of Arc. So many examples of saints that were persecuted by the religious. And even if we get out of the historical idea of this, and we just think of that like an allegory, as an archetype, it shows us, I believe, where grace is wanting to point us. It's wanting to point us towards the faithful versus the obedient. And being faithful sometimes requires disobedience. I'm not talking about disobeying laws. I'm not getting into any kind of a political thing here at all. But just that it requires us as seekers to go beyond what the instructions are, what the rules of practice, the religious ideas are, and be faithful to our inner experience. which sometimes is very revolutionary compared to what the orthodox of the day might say, including the orthodox of yoga. Now there's an orthodox of yoga. All of the different approaches to meditation and spirituality, whereas once upon a time they were like different cuisines. None actually asserting that they were greater than the other, however different, now exist within an industry where each of them represents a company or a brand that is competing against the others. And so they'll say, this is the only real meditation. This is the only true kind of yoga. You understand? We're not going to find liberation in that. Now, there's two contrarian things that I have to talk about with this. One of them is that on one hand, the obedience is not going to be the way. The obedience to a method, the obedience to a doctrine, certainly the obedience to a dogma or a cult idea, obviously that's not even good for us. It can be very toxic, obviously, I think. But in some cases, we have to be a little bit obedient to even be able to not spit the medicine. Because if we can't, start oftentimes in a space of disobedience. This is a very paradoxical sort of thing. Because, if you come to me or you hire me to be your spiritual coach or something, and then I'm there and I'm like, okay, so this week do this practice and write about this every day, and then you're like, well, I'm going to be disobedient, I'm going to be Krishna here, and I'm not going to follow the rules. And then you're not going to get the benefit of it. You know what I mean? There's some adherence to, teachings and teachers that we trust up to a point. But then, if I'm not just suggesting that you do this meditation and you do this writing exercise, but then I'm also saying that no, and now, you should you should leave where you live and move into my house and give me all your money, and you could see how then these things sort of bleed from something that's useful into something that is deadly very easily. But there has to be some adherence. We can't start from a place of total disobedience. And along those same lines, like right in the same kind of category of that kind of culty behavior, is this notion that these realized beings, because many of them were very mischievous, many of them did have very strange behavior, but that same sort of idea is what is used when someone has an attainment, or they say they have an attainment, or they have a position as a spiritual leader that they believe or that they say makes them beyond the law or beyond question. Their behavior is beyond question. This is very tricky stuff, you guys. Again, that's why we have to be awake, because this term is a term, crazy wisdom, that was coined by Trungpa Rinpoche. He was a great master in many regards. I still have people read his book, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. I feel like it's one of the great masterpieces of modern spiritual thought. And he coined this term crazy wisdom, partly because he was quite crummy. Talk about mischievous. This guy, holy moly. He didn't conform to anything. And part of his not conforming to anything included really alcoholic drinking and very harmful womanizing of people within his community. And gradually over time, and he called this, well, it's like crazy wisdom. Okay, it doesn't conform. He's a Tibetan Buddhist. Some of my behavior doesn't conform to the Tibetan Buddhist codes of conduct, but it's crazy wisdom. You just don't understand it from my perspective because I'm so enlightened and you're not. And maybe even if that was true when he coined it, whether it was the alcoholic drinking or what it was, but he lost the plot at some point and just became actually just a toxic thing. His behavior just became so harmful, and to the point where it makes it hard for many people to take his earlier teaching seriously because of how he became later in his life. This stuff, especially these advanced teachings, traditionally were taught within very strict guru-disciple relationships and contexts of the guru-disciple relationship, where someone was doing their spiritual practice under supervision, and not just under any supervision, but under pretty strict supervision, where you had someone, a guru, who was a spiritual authority, and hopefully a real one, who was able to tell you, it's like, no, you're off track now. You're misunderstanding this. You need to reel in the crazy. and partially because the last generation of these gurus, as they went from the relatively isolated Eastern culture into the wider Western culture, and they started just having sex with everyone and partying and getting caught up in money and all these other kinds of things, we don't trust gurus anymore, I think part of it is just this is the evolution that we're in this moment now. But, we don't, chances are you listening to me, you don't have a guru, you don't have a person, a one person that you consider to be this authority for you. And you probably shouldn't, quite frankly. People nowadays who put themselves out there as gurus, by and large, seem to be in a racket. Okay. By and large, there may be exceptions. I'm not trying to be definitive about that, but then the question becomes, okay, so on one hand, there's this mischievous nature of God, and in order to be in the vibe with the mischievous nature of God, we need to also maybe embrace a certain degree of mischievous nature within us as disciples. But then where's the guardrail? I think that it's important that we have some supervision. But it's not just one. It's not just this one teacher, this supervision like that, but actually we have these 3 layers of supervision. One layer of supervision is that. I think that it's important to have a teacher. Not like necessarily a guru who sits on a platform and everything they say is, God's word and all of that. I think that gets very dangerous. But to have a teacher, teachers in many cases, that are authorities, that have attained, at least to some degree, what they're teaching, who can know us, that we can be vulnerable with, and that can help guide us. I think that that is really crucial. It's a lost thing in this day and age, and it's very important. It's one of the roles that I play. Sometimes very reluctantly, but nonetheless, it's a very important one. But that can't and shouldn't probably be the only one. We should also have a layer of supervision, which is our peers. Right? So we're not meant to be doing this in isolation. Nowadays, it's very difficult. We're doing this talk right now over some sort of a device, and chances are you're there alone listening to this. You're not in a room full of people watching this on a big screen. You're going to talk about it afterwards. Who knows what you're hearing in all of this? I'll probably never know. Only a few of you may ever, come to something that I do or reach out, contact me or something. Who knows what you're getting from this? But from my point of view, but then do you have peers that you talk about this stuff with, that you can get some supervision from? Yes, it's not like supervision. It's not vision from above, but some kind of supervision that way. And then the other kind is this is why one of the things that is I think a valuable offering these days are the teacher trainings. I do teacher trainings, not because I necessarily think that we need to have more teachers in the world. I think that we do, as far as like what I teach anyway, but there's a lot more teacher trainings than there are need for, especially yoga teachers in the world, in my opinion. But ordinary yoga teachers. But I think that provides another layer of support for us when we have people that are coming up behind us. Right? So we have people before us. That's better to think of than above and below, okay? Like not supervision, but like you have a teacher that has been down the path that you're on, that can help you on it. You have people that are walking the path with you. And then you have people that are coming up the path behind you that you are responsible for to some degree. We learn this in the 12-step programs, All of this really helps, again, not to follow something that is preset, but it helps to be awake enough to be able to be on this twisty, hard to discern sometimes path. It also makes it so much more enjoyable. So what is it for you? Like, have you had that experience? Just take a moment and reflect on, what would it be like for you to embrace relationship with God, relationship with grace, where you allowed that force to be mischievous, where you allowed it to be Krishna stealing your clothes and leaving you naked. Where you could allow grace to be this thing that sets you up, that pumps you up, only to deflate you and maybe teach you a lesson. Not to be mean, but to make you stronger. What would that mean for you? Something to think about.